Hello children and welcome to the session. Before we get into the chapter, let us recall a few things that we have studied over the last few years. We have learned that human beings and animals depend on plants for food. We have learned that plants prepare their own food using the process of photosynthesis. But when it comes to so many human beings, when it comes to an entire country, how do we produce that much amount of plants to feed all of them? This process of organization and deciding what to produce, when to produce, and how to produce comes under the category of crop production. In this chapter, we are going to learn what are crop plants. We are going to learn about the different agricultural practices. We are going to learn about pest control and food from animal sources. So first, let us understand what are crops. Crops are plants which are grown in large quantities. Cereals were the first cultivated crops, but now we understand there is a whole list of crops that are grown which cater to a variety of human beings. Let us see some common crop plants. We have cereals, wheat, rice, barley, etc. We have pulses, gram, peas, beans, etc. We have root crops like sweet potato. We have tuber crops like potato and tapioca. We have oil seeds, groundnuts, sunflower seeds, etc. We have sugar crops like sugarcane and sugar beet. We have plantation crops, tea, coffee and cocoa. We have fiber crops, which are like jute and cotton. In order to grow these crops, there are certain steps or certain stages that have to be followed. These stages are known as agricultural practices. The first and foremost step in agricultural practices is the preparation of soil. We all know that the top layer of the earth in which the plants grow is known as soil. Soil not only provides valuable nutrients to the plants but also provides water. Then there are useful organisms like the earthworm which keep the soil aerated and make it fertile. The first step in preparation of soil is known as tilling. The process of tilling is important to aerate the soil. It is also important to remove unwanted plants which are known as weeds. And the third thing that tilling is required for is to mix the manure that has already been added to the field. Tilling allows airs to mix up with the soil. The next step is leveling. The soil that has been tilled needs to be leveled. This leveling is important to prevent soil from erosion by wind and water. Once the soil is ready, we move on to selection of seeds. It is very important to select viable seeds. By viable seeds, I mean seeds that will grow into healthy crops, seeds that are disease resistant, seeds that are not infected by any insects. So the farmers pay a lot of attention into the selection of the right kind of seeds. The next important thing to do is to understand the right depth at which the seed should be planted. In order to germinate or grow into a new plant, a seed requires a certain amount of air, water and warmth. So a seed cannot be too much on the top, a seed cannot be too much at the bottom of the surface. Seeds can be sown manually or they are sown using seed drill. A simple seed drill has got funnels spaced equally at a comfortable distance, and as the oxen or the tractors move along with the seed drill, the seeds are automatically dispensed from the funnel and sowed in the soil. Once the seeds are sowed into the soil, the next important thing is providing water. The next step is irrigation. In older times, people used to depend on rainfall for irrigation of their fields. But considering the irregularity of rain in our country, it was very important to move on to alternate systems of irrigation. Initially, farmers used tube wells and canals to water their fields. But what was the disadvantage of this method? The disadvantage was that the fields were submerged in water for a little longer duration. Because of this, half the fields were either too drenched or half the seeds were left out without any water. Another disadvantage of the same was that as the water cleared off the soil, it would wash away certain nutrients with it. So it was very important to come up with good methods of irrigation. Now, irrigation also depends on the type of crop that is to be sown in the field. For example, as you can see here, a paddy field or a rice field requires a lot of water. It has to be submerged in water, whereas wheat crops require less water. The irrigation and the amount of irrigation also depends on the weather condition. During humid times, you need to water the fields a little less. In dry weather, you need to water the fields a little more. During cold weather, you have to remember that early morning watering of the field can damage the crops. The next important condition that we need to remember for irrigation is the type of soil. Remember learning in one of the previous classes that there are 3 types of soil. Sandy soil. In sandy soil, the water is never retained, so it needs a lot of irrigation. The second kind was loamy soil. Loamy soil contains the right amount of water it holds to allow the crops to grow. And the third kind of soil is clay soil. Clay soil needs very less irrigation because water tends to remain in the soil for a very long time. The importance of irrigation. Irrigation provides moisture that is necessary for the germination and growth of seeds. It is necessary for the proper growth of plants. Irrigation is also necessary for chemical activities that take place inside the soil. Irrigation is also important to protect the plants from hot winds and frost. The nutrients dissolve easily in water and they are then absorbed by the roots. Irrigation also helps in keeping the soil moist and ready for cropping all the time. Let us understand about the latest methods of irrigation. Sprinkler irrigation. In sprinkler irrigation, horizontal pipes are connected on the ground and they have nozzles at the top. These pipes go in circles and the water is spread equally around the entire field. The next type of irrigation is drip irrigation. As you can see in the picture, pipe runs across the field and they have got separate outlets. These outlets give out very little water at one time. This can also be manually controlled. This ensures that only sufficient amount of water is taken up by the soil and this reduces the wastage of water by about 50%. After irrigation, let us now learn about the next step. The next important part in growing crops is maintaining the fertility of the soil. Once the crops begin to grow, they are already using nutrients from the soil. So how do you ensure that the nutrients are in continuous supply to the soil? There are 3 different ways that we will learn here. The first one is manures. Manures are organic substances that are made from dead decaying animals. You must have learnt about compost. Composting is a method of creating manure by decomposing kitchen waste and certain other organic waste. The third kind of method of adding nutrients to the field is by adding fertilizers. Let us now look at the differences between manures and fertilizers. Manures, as you can see, are natural organic substances and they are obtained by decomposition of plants and animals. Fertilizers, on the other hand, are inorganic chemicals that are made in factories. Manure supplies most of the nutrients to remove the general deficiency of soil. Fertilizers, on the other hand, are nutrient-based. This means that certain fertilizers will be able to provide only nitrogen, others may be able to provide only potassium or phosphorus. The third difference is that manure is very bulky and it is very difficult to store, whereas fertilizers are very compact and easy to store. Manures are not water soluble. Fertilizers are water solubles. Manures act very slowly, fertilizers act very quickly. And having understood the advantages of fertilizers, let us also understand what is the disadvantage of fertilizers. Fertilizers are chemical substances. Overuse of fertilizers not only damages the soil, increasing its chemical acidity, it also has a very detrimental effect on the farmers and their skin. And obviously, consumption of vegetables or fruits laden with fertilizers is certainly not a good idea for our general health as well. Now, let us understand how plants take up nitrogen. We have understood that they take up the required nutrients from the soil, but nitrogen is one substance that is not freely available in the soil. Nitrogen is present as a gas in the air. The process by which nitrogen reaches the soil is known as nitrogen cycle. As we shall understand from this picture, the atmospheric nitrogen reaches the soil in two ways. First is lightning. Lightning breaks down the nitrogen, and through water in the rain, it travels all the way down to the soil. The second way in which atmospheric nitrogen is made available to the soil is by nitrogen fixing bacteria in the root nodules of leguminous plants. Now, once the nitrogen reaches the soil, it is readily absorbed by the roots of the plant and utilized to make proteins. But how do we return this nitrogen back to the atmosphere is also a very interesting process. Once the animals and plants die, the bacteria present in the soil decompose these and release the nitrogen back into the soil. Once these animals and plants die, they are decomposed by bacteria in the soil, and from here the nitrogen is released back into the air. It is very interesting to note that the process by which the atmospheric nitrogen reaches the soil is called nitrification, and the reverse process by which atmospheric nitrogen reaches the atmosphere back is known as denitrification. So, after we have taken care of all the nutrients that are provided to the plants for growth, what is the next thing that we need to take care of? It is weeding. What are weeds? Weeds are basically unwanted plants that grow among the main crop plant. They compete with the main crop not only for sunlight but also for water and nutrients. Because of a large amount of weeds in a field, the plants may not get adequate nutrition and they may not be able to grow the way they should grow. Now let us look at some kinds of weeds, common weeds that grow in a field. As you can see here, there is grass, there is bathua, there is hirankuri, javi and cholai. Now how do you remove these weeds? The most commonly used method is by removing the weeds manually. But another method used nowadays is by using weedicides. These weedicides are chemicals that act only on the weeds and not on the main plant. Now, other than weeds, there are certain other animals, tiny little animals which are known as pests, which also harm the field. A few examples of pests that we can read here are rats, insects, birds and larvae. Now these damage the plant by eating through the fruit, the leaves or boring into the soil and making the roots very unhealthy. The method that is used for pest control is by spraying pesticides. These pesticides, as we can see in the picture, are either sprayed manually or are sprayed through an aircraft. Obviously, spreading the insecticide or the pesticide through an aircraft would cover a larger area. Once the crops are all ready, they have to be harvested. Harvesting is the next step of agricultural practices. Harvesting is usually done manually in India, but nowadays farmers are also using tractors called harvesters. These harvesters remove the crop from the root. The next step after harvesting is known as threshing. Threshing removes the grain from the main plant. Once the grain has been removed from the main plant, it has to be separated from the chaff or the tiny bits of grass that are still attached to it. This is done by winnowing. Nowadays, there is a combination of harvesters and threshers which does both the works in one go. So, right after the crops are harvested, it is very important to take care of storage. They should not be kept in dirty bags. They should not be left lying around for the cattle and the insects to feed on them. Additionally, there are two ways in which the plants are stored. The first is cold storage. Most fruits and vegetables spoil easier in warm conditions. They are immediately put into cold storage to last them longer. But we should always remember that from the time of harvesting to the duration of cold storage, if the time is too much, then also these fruits and vegetables will spoil. Another way of storing grains is called dry storage. Dry storage is usually done in granaries. Now, in granaries, the main thing to learn and notice is that the granaries must always be kept dry. The granaries must be free of any kind of infection from fungus, molds, rats, and other insects. Once the grains are harvested, stored properly, the next is reaching out to the customers, which we all know is done through trucks traveling from states to another. Let us now understand the food from animal sources. The branch of agriculture which deals with the rearing of animals, breeding, feeding, and care of domestic animals, this is called animal husbandry. In animal husbandry, there are a few things that are taken care of. Number one, proper feeding and clean drinking water. Number two, clean and ventilated shelter. Number three, prevention of animal diseases from spreading. And the next one is proper breeding of animals, which is very important to ensure the continuity of life cycle. The animals that provide us milk are known as milch cattle. Milch cattle is kept in sheds and provided clean drinking water. Similarly, animals that provide us eggs and meat are also kept in clean sheds, and that is known as poultry farming. Poultry farming also takes care of another thing, that the newborn chicks are kept separately from the parents. This is so that in case there are any diseases with the older chickens, it does not come down to their chicks. Next, let us understand about bird flu. Bird flu is a disease that is commonly found in birds. If infected, human beings can also catch the same disease. Certain precautions need to be taken in order to avoid bird flu for those who are handling birds at everyday basis. Always wash the kitchen surface and knives that have come in contact with uncooked meat. Never eat uncooked poultry or poorly cooked poultry. Next is stay away from live bird markets in case they have been infected by bird flu. And the last is avoid touching the surfaces that have been exposed to the saliva, feces or urine of the birds. The next in case of animal food are fish. Large-scale production of fish as food is known as pisciculture. Many countries have huge fish farms along the coastal regions, and so does India. We also obtain honey from honeybees. The rearing of honeybees to obtain honey is known as apiculture. Honey is a valuable source of food and it gives us carbohydrate, which is an energy yielding food. Now, in this chapter, we have learned many important things. We have learned the various stages of agricultural practices. We have learned how every stage is very, very essential in order to get a good produce. We have also studied about food that we get from various animals, which chiefly includes milk, eggs, meat, fish, and honey. So, thank you so much.